The August data show a moderation.
Janet Norwood, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, announces the latest unemployment figures to Congress.
Gains in payroll employment, as measured in the business survey, were small, and unemployment in August was unchanged from July.
Because unemployment is such a powerful indicator of the health of the economy, these statistics are anxiously awaited each month. But where do they come from? It's extremely impractical to ask every single adult every month if he or she is employed.
Good morning. My name is Terry Hansen. I'm from the United States Census Bureau. The Bureau is conducting a survey of employment and unemployment here and across the nation.
Instead, a sample is used, a subset of the population which is chosen to represent the whole. Each month, the Census Bureau visits 60,000 households, interviewing people on a range of topics, including employment.
How many hours did you work last week at all jobs?
I worked 3 days, about 24.
Now, these households are specifically chosen to represent the incredibly diverse population of the United States. How is it that such a small proportion of households can accurately represent the whole? Well, it's the way they're selected, and that's what we'll be looking at in this unit. We'll see that the sample for a national survey is chosen by chance, but the design is a lot more complicated than a simple random sample. And we'll see that the reliability of a survey's results depends on the way it's executed. To ensure that survey questions are understood and answered honestly, the questionnaire has to be well designed, and interviewers have to be well trained.
In general, do you favor or oppose the busing of black and white school children from one school district to another?
In general, I would favor it.
Okay.
Have Americans' attitudes about racial integration changed? And if so, how? Jim Davis has been tracking these questions for 15 years.
On race relations, tremendous liberalization. Approval of busing to promote racial integration has gone up steadily through the period.
Now please tell me if you agree or disagree with this statement. Most men are better suited emotionally for politics than are most women.
I disagree.
What has been the trend in attitudes towards women?
Feminism is doing very well. Approval of women working, approval of women's involvement in politics, things like that have gone up steadily.
Do you approve or disapprove of a married woman?
What has been the trend in attitudes toward premarital sex?
In that circumstance, yes.
Okay.
Enormous increase in tolerance of premarital sex. We have tremendous liberalization there. On the other hand, for extramarital sex, no change, very high disapproval.
I'm going to name some of these problems.
What is the process that takes us from the opinions of individuals to these sweeping conclusions about national trends? Studying what Americans think is the project of the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. NORC conducts national surveys on such topics as education, health, the family, the labor force, and the social fabric of America. The General Social Survey, or GSS, has been tracking the changing attitudes and beliefs of the American population since the early 70s.
First, the
core of the GSS is 1,500 personal interviews conducted nationwide every year. How do researchers know that these 1,500 are representative of the entire population?
Once you make sure that your sampling techniques establish an equal chance for everyone, then that is the underlying premise which assures that the 1,500 will be representative of the 200 million Americans, because all the 200 million Americans had an equal fair chance of being in the sample.
A good sample design like NORC's ensures that the chosen sample is representative of the entire population. Even a large sample can mislead if it's not representative. In 1936, the magazine Literary Digest predicted that Alfred E. Landon would beat Franklin D. Roosevelt in that year's presidential election. The magazine based its prediction on 2,376,000 questionnaires, a huge sample size. The survey respondents were drawn from lists of automobile and telephone owners. At the same time, a young man named George Gallup used a sample of only 50,000 people and predicted that Roosevelt would win with 56% of the vote. Gallup's prediction was ridiculed as naive until the election. Roosevelt won with 62% of the vote, and Gallup's career took off like a rocket. The problem with the Literary Digest sample was economic bias. The list was weighted in favor of those with enough money to buy cars and phones, a much smaller portion of the population in the 30s than it is today. So because the poll was not random, it was biased. It missed the large pro-Roosevelt sentiment among lower-income voters. Letting impersonal chance choose the sample is the key to avoiding bias or systematic favoritism. We could use a simple random sample as our selection procedure, but we'd need a list to draw from that included every member of the population. And that's okay with small populations, but with large ones, it's not practical. Instead, we use a more complex design, one that's specifically tailored to lead to the kind of information we want. The sample is still drawn by chance, but it's selected in stages rather than all at once. A convenient way to divide the country is into its 3,000 or so counties. What we want to do in the first stage is to select a random sample from among these counties. In the second stage, we want a random sample of towns within each county, and finally, we want to randomly select individual households in each town. But first, we have to decide how to take the sample at each stage. Most of the 3,000 or so counties in the United States are rural. So if we randomly choose, say, 50 counties, we could easily wind up without a single urban county. And that would not give us a very representative sample of the country. So before we sample, we first separate the counties into categories: urban, suburban, and rural. This process of dividing a population into units that are similar in some way, here urban, suburban, and rural counties, is called stratification. When we separate a population into groups, or strata, we are dividing it ahead of time in order to produce more reliable results. Once we've divided the counties into groups, we take separate random samples from each. First, we choose from the urban counties, then from the suburban counties, and then from the rural counties. This is exactly how the General Social Survey is designed. First, all the counties in the U.S. are stratified by region and by urban-rural classification. This ensures that all regions will be represented and that there will be some cities in the sample. Then the samples are taken in stages. First, a random sample of counties within each stratum. Next, a random sample of neighborhoods. Then, a random sample of blocks. Once the sample selection is down to the block level, NORC checks a census list to see if any residences have been added or taken away.
Here's another batch of our sample frame updates.
The list is updated, and eventually a final selection of households is made. A careful selection procedure is essential for getting reliable data, but it's not all that's required.
Excuse me, can I ask you a quick question?
Poor interviewing techniques will undermine even the best survey design. Here are some ways in which conducting a survey can go wrong.
We're doing a survey on the arms race.
The wording of a question can easily influence people's answers. Listen to how the same question can be asked in radically different ways.
The Soviet Union now has a slight edge in nuclear weapons over the United States. Do you support or oppose a freeze on nuclear weapons?
I don't trust the Russians.
So you would oppose a freeze?
Correct.
Thank you very much. The nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Soviet Union contain about 50,000 warheads. Do you support or oppose a freeze on nuclear weapons?
Support.
Thank you. We're doing a survey on marriage. We don't believe it. You don't believe it? Are you married?
Responses may also be suspect if people think others are listening.
If you had to do it over again, would you marry your spouse?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you would. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, people may voice opinions on subjects about which they know nothing.
A quick question. We're doing an opinion survey on politics. Do you support or oppose the U.S. aid to the rebels in Eastern Alpha Centauri?
Oppose.
Thank you
If
very
you've
much.
never heard of the Alpha Centauri rebels, don't worry. They don't exist.
Quick question.
Finally, the appearance of the interviewer may influence the response.
Personal preferences and appearance. Do you think you can trust men with mustaches?
Yes.
The moral here is clear. There's more to interviewing than just asking questions.
Are there any situations you can imagine in
The
which
people at NORC are aware of these problems and work hard to counteract them. When designing questionnaires, researchers want to make sure people understand the questions the way they were intended to be understood. Think aloud sessions take them into the thought process of the respondents.
Very illegal.
Okay. Are there any situations you can imagine in which you would approve of a man punching an adult male stranger?
If a situation came up like you saw someone being hit, and you would say to yourself, why are you hitting that individual? And you walk up, pow! Okay, that, I don't necessarily approve of it. But if it calls for a punch, then give it to him.
The response process is a complicated thing. People have to, interpret the question correctly in the way that the researcher wanted it interpreted. They have to retrieve from memory whatever information is relevant to answering the question. Often they have to combine the information into some kind of overall judgment, and then they have to report an answer. And things can go awry in each of those steps.
How many long-distance calls have you made in the last month? Tell me what you're thinking as you answer this question.
Once in a while, I'll call my brother in Michigan.
By having people talk aloud as they answer survey questions, you can detect some of these mistakes, and you can also get a better sense of how people go about trying to answer the question, and therefore improve how you phrase the question.
I'm going to name some of these problems, and for each one, I'd like you to tell me whether you think we're spending too much money on it, too little money, or about
how a question is worded can be crucial.
Welfare?
I think we're spending too much on welfare.
In a questionnaire experiment, NORC found that only 30% favored spending more for welfare, but 60% favored spending more for assistance to the poor.
Too little.
When you're dealing with the issue of public assistance, we found that it's a very complex issue with a lot of different images brought to the public mind. And you have to take and ask not one simple question, but a whole series of questions that tap these different dimensions.
You sort of act like a tape recorder. You're just recording what the respondent is saying.
Even with careful survey design, interviewers have to be trained properly, or the response data will be invalid. One difficult situation for the interviewer is when a respondent answers don't know to a question.
It's a lazy don't know, what we call lazy don't know. And that's that they just need a minute to think. And if you probe that and say, well, just take a minute to think about it, then they do come up with an answer.
What about an embarrassed don't know? Say it was something like, how many times have you had sex during the past year? And you know that the person, if they don't know, they've got a pretty good idea of how many times.
Okay.
But they answer, don't know.
Yeah.
Then is it okay to probe and say 20 times, 30 times?
You suggest an answer?
Well, is it? No?
No,
Okay.
absolutely. That you never suggest an answer. You would.
Another important lesson is how to remain neutral in tone of voice, response, and body language. Role-playing helps illustrate this point.
Well, Miss Brandon, during an average week, how many drinks would you say you consume?
Oh, about, I would say 20.
Really?
Oh, no, really, only 2 or 3. I was just kidding you.
Okay.
Okay. Do you see how she changed her answer?
Yeah.
She knew that interviewer was shocked. And maybe she's a teetotaler. And it would set the mood for the rest of the interview. And you obviously would not get honest responses. This was a real example of interviewer bias.
Another role play.
Don't you agree?
How to deal with the reluctant respondent.
Hello, this is Lee Brandon with NORC at the University of Chicago.
Yes.
Okay. University of Chicago. Now I'm here. You received a letter recently that I would be calling on you to interview you, and I would like to come in and interview you.
I don't have time. There's some people next door who they sit around all day and they have nothing else to do, and I'd rather you go over there. Please don't bother me right now.
Well, they're not the person that was selected for this interview. You're a very important person to us, and it's not your neighbor. She might fall into a sample in a survey another time, but she is not the one that was selected for this survey. It's you that we need.
Refusal to participate can bias a survey, so one of the skills of good interviewing is encouraging people to respond.
Hi, I'm Miss Cheatham from NORC at
The process is never perfect. Even with the best of plans, NORC still has to visit 2,000 households to get the necessary 1,500 respondents for the survey. Nevertheless, because the survey was thoroughly thought out at every stage, designers can be confident that the results fairly represent the opinions of the American public. As we've seen, this confidence rests on attention to those things that underlie any good survey. Sound sample selection assures us that we can treat the sample as representative of the entire population. Random sampling is the key idea. Making sure that questions are phrased clearly helps us get the information we want. And well-trained interviewers encourage people to respond without distorting their answers. This material has been excerpted from the college television course Against All Odds, Inside Statistics, and re-edited for use in high school curricula. Against All Odds is funded by the Annenberg CPB project. Additional funding provided by these companies and foundations. This adaptation is supported by a grant from the National Science Foundation.